Hi there, first years. This week is all about Marxism, so let's get going. Well done for getting all your functionalism stuff in, that was brilliant. And your 15 markers are either back or on the way back to you right at the moment. So we're now on week 3 of education, and we're going to look at Marxism and neo-Marxism. So this is the plan that we made as soon as we started teaching at home. So you can have a look. So far then, we've done the mock, and we had the little voiceover explaining how to answer the questions. You did the mock papers and you aced it. A couple of you have rewritten some questions, which is superb. And I have put up a model methods paper. So particularly if you want to see a 30 out of 30 for the OLS replicat question. Then we had a think about the purpose of education, like what does it do? And you uploaded your completed booklets, which were really clear about the function of education. And we watched those 2 documentaries. Do you remember? The Woke Working Class Boys and the Bridge Academy. Then we had functionalism, and that was all about value consensus, social solidarity, team sports, history. It was all about education as being really positive and really neutral, i.e. Education is meritocratic. If you are able, you rise to the top, and if you're not, you go to the bottom. And the real function of education is to sort and sift us. Some of us will need to be consultant surgeons. Some of us will need to clean the surgery, clean up after surgery, clean the theatre. And education just sorts and sifts us into piles. Who's going to do which job? So it's perfectly appropriate that some people do really well and get better paid jobs, and other people don't do as well at school and get lower pay and lower status jobs. It just helps society function. And then you wrote the 15 marker and you did all those lovely Nearpod activities. We're now on Marxism, and this is the voiceover bit, so I want to explain to you about classical and neo-Marxism. And then rather than doing a second video, I'm going to do it all in one. Obviously, you have to pause it because otherwise it'd be boring for you. And this is the task you're going to be handing in. So, as I said, it'll be the 5 marker on culture you'll be writing, making a handout as an individual, or you can do, if you can type on a Google Doc, like it doesn't matter where you are, so you could do it with your friends as well. 15 mark plan or essay in full, and a class documentary almost like as an extra activity for you to do. I would though, because it's really interesting. Next week, we'll be finishing Marxism, recap of Marxism and functionalism, so really comparing them. What do they do differently to each other? What do they say? And the shorthand is functionalism think education benefits everybody. Marxism believes it benefits just the bourgeoisie. And then you will be writing a 35 mark essay, and then it's half term. After half term, we'll be moving on to like feminism and postmodernism, class, gender, ethnicity, that type of stuff. But for today, let's just focus on Marxism. So this is our plan. I have divided up between lesson 1 and lesson 2, but you can do it as you see fit. You've put really clearly, that's what I need submitted. So we're going to start with the 5 mark culture, which we're going to self mark. Then I'm going to teach you Marxism and education. Quite wordy, quite a lot of theorists, a lot of me talking. But you can pause me and complete the booklet as you go. And I'll need you to complete the booklet in full, particularly a bit of comparison completely independently between Marxism and functionalism. Lesson 2, or whenever this week, working in small groups via Google Docs from the safety of your own home, or by yourself, if you'd rather just get on with it independently, produce a revision resource of one key Marxist plus evaluation. That really gets you ready for the essay next week. I'd ask you to upload it as an individual, but it may well be that I make a little revision resource and put all the theorists in. It'd be really handy for revising for the exam. I'll ask you to write a 15 marker either in a plan form with the key names you've picked all out in full sentences. The key focus of it though is the knowledge, so I'm not too fussed in how it's represented, to be honest with you, because next week we will be writing a 35 marker in full. And watch school swap the class divide. One of the reasons I like education is there's so many interesting documentaries, and this one is where they literally swapped pupils from a very working class school to a very elite private boarding school. It's really interesting. And the teachers swap too. And I think it's quite intriguing what they say about the difference between the two schools. So I would definitely watch that, even if you put it on the background while you're doing something else for, for a different lesson. So that's like a really extra add-on, almost like a bit of homework, really. So the first task I'd like you to do, I'd like you to pause this slide and I'd like you to complete a Culture 5 marker. One of the things Mel and I like to do is to continually stop and drop and go back to earlier material, because you do a linear A-level. So all the information covered has to stay in your mind right up until 2021. So just to make sure that that's going in your long-term memory, as you know, we pause every so often and do a completely random exam piece from earlier in the course, and this is it. I'd like you to time yourself writing for 10 minutes. If you need 15 or 20 because you can't remember, you've got to get your old notes out, then go for it. Take as long as you need to in prep, but write for around 10. The question is, with reference to the item and sociological knowledge, explain the meaning of the term identity. You can see it's at 5. And you know that if we're aiming for our 5 marks, you're looking for around 5 sentences. You can follow DEAL if it helps you. Describe it, define it, explain, example, another point, link it back to the item, or you can just count on your hands. Say 5 things. As long as you mention the item, you can't go too far wrong. So pause this now, please, and open up a doc on a piece of paper and handwrite it. It's only a 5 marker, and do it now for 10. Okay, once you've done that, let's have a look at the mark scheme. The mark scheme here tells us what you're going to get out of 5. Have a read through and mark yourself. Now, you can, if you want to, look at AO1 and AO2. You can write your mark like how I do on the side of your exam pieces, like 3 + 2 = 5, or you can just give it a number. So it could even be counting up the sentences. Is it a 5 out of 5, 3 out of 5, 4 out of 5? I'd like you to upload the marks, so the number I want. Now, if you just don't know, upload the paragraph. Okay. The purpose of this is just a little warm up to get you ready to do exam piece. So try and mark it yourself. If you're not sure, upload the paragraph for me to double check. That's absolutely fine. Okay, so this is the main issue then. Marxism, hegemony, can be pronounced hegemony, but then people often spell it with a D, so we'll stick with hegemony, and correspondence theory. And Marxism is very much about this. What you do at school here directly corresponds to getting you ready for the workplace. So put simply, the reason why school is a bit boring is that most of being an adult is a bit boring. So for Marxism, education serves capitalism in 2 main ways. The first way is it reproduces existing inequalities present in a capitalist society. If you go to a very elite boarding school, for example, you are more likely to end up in the House of Commons. You are far more likely to end up as a Prime Minister, and I've got some data about that a bit later on. So it reproduces existing inequalities. If you go to school in a very working class area with very poor facilities and life chances, odds are you'll leave school and you will maintain your social class position in the working class area. So education really just reproduces it. If you go into school quite posh, you'll end up quite posh. If you go into school quite deprived, you'll end up quite deprived. It doesn't really do anything to change it, it just reproduces it. And the second one is almost like the con, the trick. It legitimises, which just means kind of like says it's okay, or justifies these inequalities through the myth of meritocracy. It's a lie. The idea that, we look at the word, a system, ocracy, based on merit. So the people at the top are the cleverest, the most able, and the hardworking. And Marxists say that's just not true. The people at the top have been born almost like a silver spoon in their mouth. They have been born with a position of privilege there for them. They're already at the top of the hierarchy. And education lies. It tells us that if you work really, really hard, you can end up at the top of society. And in most cases, that's just not true. Obviously, in the UK, our head of state's the Queen, hereditary position. None of us, myself included, Mel included, can revise our way to be the head of state. It doesn't work like that. So Marxists would look at the UK, with still kind of like having a monarchy, as a real example of a society that cannot be meritocratic. And you and I might say, well, hold on, because actually, while the Queen is the head of state, it's mainly the Prime Minister and the House of Commons, House of Lords, that kind of scrutinise. It's mainly the elected MPs. Okay, now let's look at the history of Prime Ministers and work out how many of them started to score a bit posh. So for Marxism, education reproduces inequalities and it lies to us about meritocracy. And this is it. This is the main. Anytime we're not sure about Marxism, we come back to this house. So pause this and read around the outside. I'm going to read out loud to you. It's in front of you. The only comments I'd make on this slide is this bottom section is where the horrible stuff happens. That's the exploitation of the bourgeoisie, of the proletariat. And you remember about 1 billion times I've written up on the board, you work it, I don't know, Tesco, you put £100, £500 for the till 1 hour, you take £6, wages, where does the rest of the money go? And we say, well, it goes on the products, it goes on the heat and the light and the till receipt, and then we look for the profit or surplus value, and we realise that goes to the bourgeoisie, the owner. And Marx says, when you go to work, you make other people rich. Now, if this is true, I don't know, if this is so horrible, why don't we have a revolution and get rid of it? And that's where the superstructure comes into play. This is all the agencies of socialisation which brainwash us into accepting capitalism as a normal and natural state. So all of these reinforce that the power imbalance between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat is natural, it's normal, it can't be a different way, and we're in a meritocratic society. If you were just a bit cleverer, you could be Prime Minister too. And we just need to accept our position in society. There'll always be somebody cleverer and more able than you, and it's completely fair. So that's Marxism. Do pause this and have another look through if you're not sure. If you've got any problems, go on to Hangout during the lesson time. That's why we're available, particularly in lesson 2, when you're actually doing the work and getting to grips with all the concepts. So let's start having a look through all the different Marxists and what they actually say. And I'll start with Ralph Miliband. For those of you who do politics or have got interest in politics, that is the dad. Ed Miliband, the ex-Labour leader, he's still in the Labour Party now and an active role. That's his dad. He was an active Marxist academic in the 70s, was really well regarded actually, so you'll see quite a lot of these books, particularly if you go into university and study this. Anyway, Miliband says meritocracy is a myth. But this front bit, that's what you've got to really remember. Meritocracy is a myth, it's just not true. How come? Well, he said that functionalism is just a bit naive. Functionalists say that role of education is to sort and sift. Actually, the main purpose is for education to produce class inequality. By pretending to be fair, and that's the key word, it helps to create a false class consciousness. We believe that those at the top of society deserve it. Now, there is an argument that all of you sat the same GCSE exam papers, so it was fair and neutral. And if some kids walked out with all 9s and some kids got 1s, 2s and 3s, it means that the 9s are more intelligent and more hardworking. But then if we start to look at the schools that the children at the top went to, we might start to see things like, hold on, a disproportionate amount went to fee-paying schools, which do incredibly well because you've got much smaller classes and better resources. And then you might say, well, actually, is that intelligence or is that just about money? So Miliband's very critical. Meritocracy is a myth. For example, Boris Johnson is the 5th Prime Minister to have been educated at Eton since 1945. But we're taught in life that we all have equal chances in education and life. Let me tell you, no Prime Minister has been to Priory or Springfield or any of our local schools. And so is it the case then that if we all work really hard, we'll end up there? This extra reading, this is an article, is the new meritocracy sham, and I'll put the link so you haven't got to go through the slides and stuff. And this visual thing here is really interesting in terms of the education, whether they've been literally just at that one school, Eton, other independent schools, or another selective school, a grammar school. Okay, so I'll leave you to have a read through that and make your own minds up, really, perhaps once you've looked at the PowerPoint in full. So Miliband, meritocracy is a myth. Now, Bowles and Gintis are absolutely key. They talk about correspondence theory. I have seen it mentioned in an exam before as correspondence principle. As long as it's got the word correspondence in it, it's talking about this. Now, the main deal with this is that school corresponds to work. It's quite straightforward. Like, pause this, do the work in your booklet. Schools consist of a clearly defined hierarchy which mirrors the hierarchy of workers from the bottom to the top. So the top of a school might have their head teacher, the bottom hierarchy of the school, depends if you went through staffing, it might be kind of like cleaning staff maybe, and possibly the pupils. So if we look at the hierarchy, it's really, really clear, and that just gets us ready for the world of work. So you've got the boss at the top, the people who are on the lower wage, for example. And so it's almost a way of brainwashing us to accept our role in the hierarchy. You know you can't be at the top, or very few people will, so get used to it. Pupils who conform and fit in well do better than those who display challenging behaviour to their teachers. And it's almost like these dependable plodders, the children who just do the worksheets, don't question, do as they're told, they are rewarded. And that behaviour of not questioning and literally just obeying somebody because they're more important than you get rewarded. And so basically at school we learn to become subservient, which is like accepting your place in hierarchy lower down, reliable workers. It's a brainwashing device. What I'd like you to do now is to pause this and look at page 3 in the booklet and start to think about success in school and success in the workplace. Now, if we were in class, we'd write a big list of success in school and we'd put things like punctuality, attendance. Do you remember you get like awards at school for turning up, which is pretty much just the luck that you haven't been poorly? I mean, I'm not saying there isn't any, I don't know, positive behaviours in there at all. But if you're poorly, it's usually an accident, isn't it? You don't try to. But anyway, the kind of things like rewarding doing what you're supposed to. And that could be turning up, wearing the right uniform, having the right equipment with you, being polite to people. You might get house points for doing as you're told, house points for going above and beyond, house points for being sensible and quiet. And it's almost a way of manipulating how we behave at school. So that's quite straightforward. What I will get you to do is to pause, jot some of those ideas down and more, there's plenty of others, and say, does it translate to success in the workplace? So do people at work need to wear uniform? Some. An appropriate work wardrobe? Yeah. Attendance, punctuality. I think you're going to struggle to find much which doesn't really correspond with the other. Being nice to people you don't like when you're at school, being nice to people you don't like, perhaps bosses at work. I think they do. It's a bit simplistic, but they possibly correspond in quite a lot of examples for sure. So have a look at that. Bowles and Gintis, correspondence theory. The purpose of school is to get us ready to be exploited in the workplace. Now, on page 3, there's like a little grid thing, and it's got two names, Hannah and Boyle and Willis, and I wanted to make some notes about them. And this is people who are criticising. Hannah and Boyle found that schools don't all necessarily brainwash you into being compliant subordinate members of the proletariat. They say, well, actually lots of schools in working class areas have working class teachers, and so they're not necessarily going to be trying to brainwash you into accepting your position. Quite often they might be trying to like jolly you along in education and get you to really challenge yourself. So to be the first one to go on to do A-levels, first one to go to university. So Hannah and Boyle said it's a bit simplistic and a bit outdated. Willis said, Bowles and Ginter's study is really quite simplistic, and they said, well, it's not detailed enough. They seem to have made assumption that everybody at school walks about almost like brainwashed zombies. I mean, think about your school. Was it the case that pupils walked about and did exactly as they were told by the evil bourgeoisie teachers? Because I'd probably suggest it wasn't, that people were messing about, playing up, or just at least not walking about like they were brainwashed, maybe. We'll talk about Willis a bit more in a minute. So, we've looked at classical Marxism. We've thought of the house of Marxism. We thought about Miliband and the myth of meritocracy, which is really just encapsulates classical Marxism. You could link that to Althusser, Marx, Engels, anyone really, but the myth of meritocracy. And we have thought about correspondence theory. Now we're going to start to look at neo-Marxism. Now the word neo means new, but it's not necessarily just that these are more recent, it's that they think something a little bit different, which will become apparent. So back onto Willis then. Pause this, use the QR code on your phone or go onto the slides and click the link. This Learning to Labour is a really classic study. You literally cannot do an A-level in sociology and not look at Learning to Labour. We will look at it more again when we look at subcultures. Basically, Willis did a piece of research on 12 working class boys. It was in the 70s, and Willis went to the school, went through the gatekeeper of the head teacher and asked if he could hang about with the boys, really, which is a bit weird now, isn't it? You wouldn't be allowed to do it. But at the time, he said, I'm a sociologist. I want to find out why the naughty kids are naughty. And so I'd like to spend some time in the bottom set classes watching the behaviour. Okay. So Willis did that. And what he found was that the working class boys knew the odds were stacked against them. They knew full well that if they did every single piece of homework, they would still end up leaving school at 15 with no qualifications and working in the factory or the building site or the dockyard or, wherever. Obviously, if we're in Portsmouth, dockyard maybe, with their dads, their uncles. And so the lads, as they called themselves, had a very negative attitude to education. They formed what Willis called an anti-school subculture. They were anti, they hated it was a waste of time, and their main job at school was to have a laugh. And they literally used that expression. They really took the mickey out of people who wanted to work, and they called them the ear rolls. And that was because they said they sat at the front of the class listening with their ears, hence they had their ear rolls or ear holes focused towards the teacher. And they thought they were just idiots. What's the point? You're not going to change your class position. They also experienced lots of behaviour like truancy, bad behaviour, and found that they were very discriminatory. There was lots of racism, sexism, and homophobia within the group, which I think they probably covered that discriminatory beliefs with kind of like a working class male banter. So Willis said the working class lads weren't unknown victims of capitalism that walked around like brainwashed zombies, like Bowles and Ginter said. They knew meritocracy was a myth and they chose to mess about and have a laugh. What's so good about this research is that Willis followed up with the boys afterwards. And even up until now, this is like mid-70s, and he still keeps in contact every few years to find out what the lads are doing. I think one of them has been in prison, one of them did an OU degree, one of them owned a garage, like selling cars, fixing cars. But right when they were like 15, 16, he followed them out into the factories, and he found that same behaviour continued, but rather than being anti-school, they were like anti-management. So you automatically don't like your boss, automatically take the mickey out of your boss, and that kind of like that real misogynistic behaviour and vocabulary, racist and homophobia really carried on. So these boys were ready to go out in the workplace. They were ready to go into the factory. But They weren't subservient victims. They chose to mess about at school because for them it's a waste of time. Meritocracy is a myth. It's not helping you. Let's have a laugh. Althusa. Bit quicker this one because we've done Althusa loads. The neo-Marxist, he argues that education is an ideological state apparatus. It literally just is another conditioning device which brainwashes us into accepting authority. Think about things like the hidden curriculum that we mentioned last week and the week before. The hidden curriculum reinforces us to accept authority. So the main purpose of education is brainwashing. Bourdieu's big concept is cultural capital. Please pause this slide and have a read through. It's all about the hidden advantage of being middle class. Now, quite often, I would make up like a little slide of this type of stuff and I would show it to students and ask them various questions. This slide really represents cultural capital. It's the hidden advantage of being middle class. Some children around the UK would look at this slide and all of it would make perfect sense. Some people are looking at this already thinking, I'm not quite sure what's going on here. If you go to a school where formal dinners are the norm, when you go to university or you get your first job in the law firm or whatever, you understand all of the etiquette. And yeah, it's about different knives and forks, that type of thing, but it's also about the etiquette, even kind of like down to wine. If you're at a formal dinner and you pour a glass of wine, who pays for it? The waiter isn't making a note and you do. Handshaking. I always ask whether students practice handshaking at school, which might sound a bit bonkers to some of you, but I guarantee that there are some children at school, some of the elite schools, they practice handshaking, they practice that confidence, they practice interview. I know anecdotally of some schools where if you were going to interview at Oxford or Cambridge, you had a formal dinner with the principal to practice handshaking, confidence, eye contact, using the right knives and forks, and getting what you want. Now, most people in Portsmouth have not had that education. And on your formal meal, you might have asparagus, and I always say, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with that photo? And people usually talk about the cutlery and stuff. Actually, the problem is the cutlery entirely. You're supposed to eat asparagus with your hands. You just pick it up and eat it. So if you went to a formal meal and you started using a knife and fork, thinking it was making you have a bit better manners, it would out you as being somebody who's working class. Now, Michaelmas term. Do we know what Michaelmas is? It's basically autumn term, but if we went to Oxford, we'd refer to it as Michaelmas. And so that is a bit of a cultural indicator. You either understand the word or you don't. The last one's down here. Now, obviously, if I was in class with you, I'd say, can you read that out for me? And almost all of you would say St. John or St. John, which does make perfect sense. That literally is what it says. However, it is a first name. And if that is your first name, it is pronounced Sinjin, like Sinjin, Sinjin. It's a very, very old-fashioned, kind of like, well, posh, like elite first name. And again, it's almost like a bit of a cultural indicator. If Sinjin is at Oxford in Michaelmas term, shaking hands and eating asparagus, knowing not to use the cutlery, we know that he, Sinjin's a man's name, has got cultural capital. He's got the hidden advantage. And that really is something which you can't necessarily put a price on. Obviously, all of this stuff costs money. I'm not saying that. But if I won the lottery all of a sudden, would I have all of these experiences? Would I understand what this term meant? Would I know how to pronounce this first name, for example? So pause this and start to think about different examples of cultural capital. I'll give you a hint. You're thinking about things like parents being able to help with UCAS, parents working at universities and understanding the difference between, I don't know, a BA or a BSc or an MA or MPhil, that type of thing. It's almost like the hidden advantage. So pause this and have a go. Okay. So obviously you've got the things we've discussed. You might have things like being encouraged to watch documentaries, being taken to art galleries when you were a child, and museums. Now, you might say, "Oh, it's about money," but it's not. A day at Legoland costs an awful lot more than even the train fare up to London from Portsmouth and to go and look around the Tate Gallery and, I don't know, the Natural History Museum. And it's almost like what cultural experiences you're exposed to. And that means that some children will find education an easier ride. Now, we will come back to Bordeaux and cultural capital when we think about class, but I don't want to miss out really key Marxist when we're doing the Marxist lessons. Now, here's Gramsci down here, Antonio Gramsci, and he talks about cultural hegemony. And do you remember I said it can be pronounced hegemony with a D, but that confuses people's spelling. So, cultural hegemony. I'm going to get you to pause and watch this clip, which explains it really, really clearly. So I'm not going to bore you, but in a nutshell, ideological or cultural hegemony basically means that the education that we learn is ideological. Um, if something's hegemonic, like masculinity, it's almost like traditional and unquestioned. Basically, what he's saying is the stuff we learn at school, we are taught is important and we don't have the ability to question it. So we know Shakespeare is better. We know that what bits of history are worth studying. Wars, probably then, I don't know, Black civil rights movement, women's history, for example. We tend to focus on wars and victorious and so on. And it's what we learn isn't neutral and objective. Do you remember that photo back on the introduction to education, and we saw the picture of the school during Nazi Germany? That's really what this is about, that we don't learn neutral education. It is hegemonic. It's the mainstream dominant view. And what do we learn? Work hard, you'll earn more money. People at the top deserve it. And I suppose Gramsci's just fed up with it. And he just thinks actually education is a brainwashing device. We learn cultural hegemonic norms. They're not objective matters of fact. But do pause this and have a little look at that clip. It's somebody doing their PhD, and he speaks quite clearly about it for like 4 or 5 minutes. Now, Ivan Illich is a really interesting Marxist who wrote this text, Deschooling Society. I'll ask you to pause this slide, have a look at the links I'm going to put up, and watch this music video. It's another brick in the wall. It's very, very critical about education, and it basically says that education is like a brainwashing device. So pause this now and have a look, because this talking bit will make much more sense if you do, please. Okay, so once you've had a look at the music video, you'll probably watch it and say that video is literally Marxism. It's my Marxism and Education lesson, and you're right, you can remember that, and it will really help you when you start to write your essay. Your 15 marker plan, whatever, this week, and your 35 marker next week. So Illich suggests that we de-school, and this is not just homeschooling, this is rejecting school. And you can read through this big quote, but this is the bit I'm going to look at it together. Schools kill creativity. The education system transforms the free individual into a robot-like figure in the system. And at some point in all of our lives, even if it were, I don't know, like 3-year-olds, imagine a 3-year-old us sat on the beach, and we might be asking our mum or dad or brother or sister, whatever, why is the sky blue? We might ask about sand, we might ask about rainbows. You know, when you actually were really interested when you were little. And now, it's almost whenever it's something to do with education, we know what's the assessment criteria, what's the learning objective, so how does this get graded? Does it go on a report? Who's surveying me? Who's reporting back to my parents? And it's almost like school takes the fun out of learning. It not only does it brainwash us to accept capitalist views, it just makes us into these like little robots that don't question, to the point where we don't now, or I don't know, perhaps you do, to start to think, well, how are rainbows formed? It's almost like we've fallen out of love with learning, and we kind of at school we only get to do things if it's graded, and that starts really early. We've got a national curriculum for 3 and 4-year-olds, and even now everything you did at secondary school was immediately banded, assessed, given a score for your homework grade. And so we couldn't just go off grid and really enjoy something. We had to just conform like little robots. And Ivan Illich said, this is outrageous, stop, take your kids out of school, never send them. Learn through play, learn through being interested. So Illich thinks that our education system as it stands is not fit for purpose. It brainwashes us to become robots. And you might say, well, most of the world's being home educated, de-schooled at the moment. They're really not. They're getting stuff through Google Classroom like you are now. And someone's saying, do this, learn this, write this, and I'll grade it. That's not de-schooling. De-schooling is a rejection of school. It's completely free. Okay, so to summarise, what's the difference? So I'm going to get you to pause this and read through. Now, a word of warning, this stuff is more complicated. This stuff I will go over again and again at year 2. If you read through this and think not entirely sure, push it to one side. You don't need it for today. You don't need it for the essay. However, if I was in front of you teaching this now, I'd show this slide, and some of you, it would click and you go, completely get it. And others of you would go, right, I'm getting that there's a distinction, and I'll keep coming back to it and chipping away. So read through this by yourself. Do not panic if this does not make full sense immediately. This is as hard as it gets. In short, classical Marxism thinks that we are like puppets on a string, that the bourgeoisie are here and you are this person here, and the strings are like the norms and values, the power of education, and we just do as we're told. Another brick in the wall, Bowles and Gintis. Neo-Marxists think that those strings, or that power from the bourgeoisie controlling us, has been cut, and we've got a bit of free will. We can go off grid, we've got a bit more freedom. That's the Willis boys, the 12 working class lads messing about, sitting at the back of the school bus, graffitiing the school bus, being unpleasant to the teachers, taking the mickey out of people who are listening, the kids who are listening. We have got free will, and we're a bit more politically aware. Okay, so have a read through that for now, park it. We'll come back to it because this is a bit trickier. Okay, so what we're going to do. So you've done task 1 already. Task 1 was a 5-mark culture. So with the culture, let's refresh our memory, write it, handwrite it, 'cause it's only small, it's only the big essays, I just can't read them. If you write 35 markers or take photos, it's so hard to read. For a little 5-marker, do what you want. Handwrite it, type it, mark it yourself. I just want a number out of 5. If you are not sure, send me the paragraph 2, no bother at all. Number 2, either in small groups online or individually, you need to produce a one-side handout on one of the theorists below. So I've picked like Marx and Engels, Althusser, Bordeaux, Willis, Bowles and Gintis. And in brackets, if you are working together, do like Anne Miliband, do and Gransky. I think a one-side handout, and I think it's really nice to keep in contact, because one of the weird things about us all working from home is that you just don't get to see people and communicate. So I would much prefer if you did work together with people, use Hangout to share details and stuff. But if you just want to get on by yourself too, that's absolutely fine. But it might be a bit more fun, to be honest with you. So I'd like you to upload this to, well, Classroom, so I can mark it. And then if you're happy, I'll put like a Google, put like a little drive together or something for revision. But on this one-side revision resource, I want you to have the theorist's main ideas, have some type of AO3 or evaluation. What would critics say? So functionalists would say, too negative, ignores the positive side. And you might chuck a name or two in from last week. Feminist ignores patriarchy. And that is one of the big criticisms of classical Marxism. It's talking about just the hidden curriculum reinforcing capitalist values. It also reinforces lots of patriarchal values too, as we'll find out in our feminism lesson. A picture of the theorist, some relevant images that make it interesting. So one side of A4 typed, image, couple of images, theorist name, main ideas, what's wrong with it, what would critics say, and upload it. Now, usually, if we were in class, I'd like try and divide this so everyone did a bit of each. Obviously, we can't do that at home, so just pick whichever one you find most interesting or most challenging. Bordeaux would be a nice one to do, because then you can list all the different types of cultural capital. Willis would be great because you can do the extra reading, watch the clip and stuff I've showed you, like research with us a bit more. Bowles and Gintis, you could have a little grid of correspondence theory. Althusi, you could start to think about, like you could spider diagram or visually represent the stuff that we are brainwashed in. You could see if there's any other, I don't know, perhaps there's another music video that might be relevant, I don't know. Marx and Engels, classic old school, you could have the House of Marxism, you could have Miliband and the Myth and stuff. Make those look good because we're going to revise from these in 2021. Okay. So the third task is an exam question. Now, typical exam questions ask about any theory's view of education. And I want to explain, I've made this title up, explain Marx's views of education, 3 Desras, 3 paragraphs, 2 names or pieces of evidence in each. Now you can either write this in full, it would be probably on one side, of typed it would be one side. Introduction, Marxism is a conflict theory that view education negatively. They believe it reinforces the class divide. Then you're on to your first paragraph. The first way it does this is through correspondence theory. Yep. I've given you some ideas there, but don't go straight onto that. So either write me out a plan where you've got the 2 names in each. I mean, that's a plan. Okay, so that's the level of detail. You could do it as a plan. You could write it out in the full paragraphs. I really don't mind. What I'm trying to test from this activity is knowledge, not actually how you write an essay. Okay, so I don't mind whether it looks like a grid like this, whether it's like a bullet point list of names and a bit of data next to them, not the key idea, or whether it's written out in full. It doesn't matter. I'm testing your knowledge. Obviously, I'll mark these and I'll make a note. If you do a plan, I will tick it off. Yep, you've made a good quality plan. If you do the essay in full, I'll mark it out of 15 and I'll write the number down. But I've got absolutely no preference because next week you're writing a full essay. If you're going to write it out in full, do it properly. Give yourself 20 minutes. If you're going to plan it, don't give yourself any more than 20 minutes. Explain Marx's view of education. Now, task number 4 is this documentary. And this head teacher, Jo Ward, it's this woman here. This blonde woman with glasses on. She's the head teacher of the state school. She's scathing. She's actually quite rude. It's about private education. Not rude about to the actual people, but she's basically saying your kids do better because they come from more privileged background. Your teachers aren't any better. Which, I don't know, might be a fair point. I don't know, I'm not a head teacher, haven't done it. And she says it's not what you know, it's who you know. The reason your kids are successful is because they're privileged. And the head teacher, this chap here of the private school, when he goes to the state, the teachers are just gobsmacked. And they literally do, I can't believe how hard state teachers work. How big is your class? Because if you're in a class of 30 and 32, that's 32 essays to mark. If you're teaching a class of 8, that's 8 essays to mark. Of course, you can have more time to set more essays. There's only so many hours in a day. I think this is just so interesting. I would definitely watch this. I'm not asking to write particular loads and loads of notes. There's some questions in the booklet I'd like you to have a look at, but this is almost like an extra piece of homework just to help you with next week's essay, really. The 5th task is for us to start to get ready for next week. Now, Mala be doing a voiceover and producing some stuff for next week. You will be doing comparison activities, but just get ready on page 12 of your booklet. Make sure your booklet's finished, of course. Just jot down some ideas. Functionalism, sort and sift, meritocracy, it's fair. Marxism, meritocracy is a myth, perpetuates the class divide. Just really try and get the 2 points of view sorted out. One of the key differences which students often forget, functionalists say that education benefits everybody in society because it's fair, neutral and sorts and sifts. Marxists say education just benefits the bourgeoisie because it brainwashes people to accept their position of authority. If we're in class, I'd say, right, how do you rate your understanding of Marxism? And you'd all be super confident because you're all wonderful. If you're not there, go on to Hangout, ask me some questions. I could literally talk about this all day long. As you know, you're probably bored already. But just ask any questions. I can't tell you how important it is you understand what Marxists think about education. Now, if that wasn't quite enough, we were probably on about like 7 or 8 hours work now. If you want to do any more, again, pause this screen or go onto the slides, use the QR code and look at the Child Poverty Action Group. Is it true that kids in poverty don't do as well in education? So let me go over here. Booklet, just to refresh your memory. So this is a booklet. Annotate, make notes, just take a copy. I mean, you can print it off if you've got paper and ink and stuff at home, but I'm not fussed. You can take a copy of it, type in it, and then we can print it off when we're back at college just to keep your folder up together. Make sure you work your way through all of this, please. All the key bits are on there for you. You can annotate around here, write some other examples of cultural capital, like parents going to university, help with UCAS and stuff. And make sure, yes, do it on a separate doc, please, because you'll need to send it in to me. Make sure that you get down to, there's your notes in the documentary, of this key ideas comparison. I think if you can get down to there by the end of the week, you'll find next week a lot easier. So let me just conclude, just to be really clear. I would like you to submit culture mark out of 5. That can be as a comment if you want when you upload it to Classroom. Oh, Bonnie, I got 4 out of 5, 5 out of 5. If you are not sure, submit the paragraph. The second thing to submit is a revision handout. If you work in 2s and 3s, it's easier, isn't it? Because you're doing less work. Can both of you submit the handout, please? Otherwise, I'm just going to get really confused about who worked with who. So just humour me and submit it too. And the 15 marker in full, which I will mark out 15, or the 15 marker plan, which I will mark that you've done a good quality piece of preparation work. Okay, any questions? Just get back to me. You can speak to us on Google Hangout, you can send emails, whatever. Hopefully that's quite clear. There's a few things for you to pause and watch, of course. Any questions, get back to me. Okay, thanks then, bye.